Okay, so we're going through about 20 years of work and 7 different projects in about the next 7 minutes. So the first 4 projects I can sort of describe as loosely being affiliated because they're all kind of like, I guess, my fantasies around being part of a girl gang. And then the last 3 are probably just related to my relentless obsession with comic books. So I would say that the overarching themes that you see within all of this work is sort of a certain kind of degree of humor or inappropriateness or at least playfulness that tends to drive what I do. So case in point, 1996, somebody made the mistake of asking my collaborators and I whether they knew of any Filipinos that could be in a parade. At which case, they said, sure. And there was, I guess in 96, there's no vetting. So we sort of invented ourselves as sort of this beauty queen contingent of motorcyclists. And then they made a mistake putting us in the parade route right next to the actual Asian princesses, which did not go well. Anyway, so we start from there. A few years later, 2005, this was about a year after Gavin Newsom had started issuing marriage licenses for same-sex marriages, and we decided to sort of monetize that, turn it into an opportunity for ourselves. So we started offering our services as professional bridesmaids. This is sort of our traditional sort of femme look. We do a sort of a lovely butch ethnic thing as well. So that kept us going for a while. A few years later, we figured, well, let's keep going on. Let's try a whole new business venture. It's 2013 now, so let's go corporate. And so since 2013, we have sort of been the executive team and founders of Mananang Google, which is sort of a shadowy tech corporation based in Silicon Valley. It's really all about what you can do with shoulder pads, and I think everybody's sort of great fears about what happens when you have women in power. So to that end, we've sort of been indoctrinating the masses through various kinds of onboarding experiences, and sort of more lately, I think because we're, globalization, we've been recruiting at the San Diego-Tijuana border. So going from that into a more recent project, this is from last year in the Morcom Rose Garden here in Oakland. I assembled a group of about 12 women to sort of behave like utter goons in this public space. And I think I'm constantly interested in what you can do with a group of women acting inappropriately in these kinds of situations. So it started out as sort of a Isadora Duncan-esque expression of, lovely togas and, the like, and then quickly devolved into sort of a straddling of a fountain to, I think, sort of an instrumental version of Hotline Bling. And then there was sort of a Broadway show tunes number set to tacos, putting on the Ritz with selfie sticks. So I'm glad somebody else put selfie sticks in their lecture. Because I think when I think about women in public space, I do feel like it's a very fraught space for women. I think it's also about this notions of both surveillance, safety, and also just narcissism and a certain kind of like obliviousness. And I kind of liked collapsing all of those things into the same space at the same time. So backtracking just a little bit to 2008, I did a public project for these kiosks in San Francisco. So when an artist gets this commission, you do 6 posters, which are then reproduced about 4 times each. So they kind of get spread up and down the street and seen by a lot of different folks. So each of the 6 posters was a year in San Francisco, 73 through 78, as experienced by a young Filipina nurse who had just emigrated from Manila. So I was really interested in sort of tying these 2 cities' histories together and looking at all the reasons that there's a real deep transnational relationship there. So 73 was the year that Marcos declared martial law in the Philippines, just as good a year as any to leave. By 74, she would have been settling into her life a little bit more stably in the US. And of course, nursing was one of the main sort of avenues of immigration for so many Filipino families. But I wanted to sort of not only sort of talk about that as her life as a worker, but her other sort of more interior life and just the more mundane moments of any new person's experience of a city, like dealing with hills and fog. And so some of the images were a little bit less loaded. By 75, she would have been sort of addressing the truly transnational aspect of being Filipino, and she would have gone home for a visit to the Philippines, so didn't need to be only about sort of coming to San Francisco, and that's the end of the story. It was also the year of the big Thrilla and Manila fight between Ali and Frazier, so that's why you see a small sort of moment down there of a boxing match. By 77, like any good San Franciscan, she would have gotten her activist groove on, and here she is at the International Hotel in what was once Manila Town and still kind of considered Chinatown. So here she is protesting the evictions of that moment. So that was a way for me to talk about that. Manila Town, interestingly though, also was home to one of the most legendary punk rock venues on the West Coast, which was the Mabuhay Gardens, which was actually a Filipino restaurant that had this kind of weird double life, which is why, quite gratuitously, you see our protagonist here sort of giggling as she sees Joey Ramone off to the side here. So, getting sort of more involved with Bay Area and local history, 2014 was the 25th anniversary of the Loma Prieta quake, which really sort of turned the region upside down. So I invited people to submit their stories to me, just sort of their memories of that day or the sort of the immediate aftermath of that, and I would illustrate as many of them as I could. So this was a guy who was working a courier route and had just gone over the Cypress Structure and had gotten home only to see that it had collapsed only minutes after he'd crossed over it. And so I had to kind of figure out how to illustrate that. This guy was in Green Apple Books in San Francisco at the sort of top, very narrow staircase and just came screeching down it as soon as the building started shaking. I thought what was also important was to talk about the ways in which we're always here, even if we're not here. So this was a woman who was actually away at college in Tacoma, and she was getting her hair cut at the moment that the screens on the TV went blank and then cut to the news feed of this earthquake having happened. Of course, her immediate fear and terror for her family at home. This woman was in her 1974 Mercury Lynx listening to the radio station, and they were playing the Tom Tom Club's Genius of Love at 5:04 p.m. when the quake hit. So all she felt was this sort of roll, and then hearing this song. And actually, the following year, the same radio station played Genius of Love again.
1 minute.
Lastly, I was surprised by how many millennials submitted stories of being really, really young when this happened. So this woman was a child when it happened, and she could care less about the actual quake and was more concerned with the fact that a fish tank had sort of overflowed and had soaked her chocolate Teddy Grahams. So I just like those kinds of moments. So lastly, speaking of water, this is a project that just launched earlier this summer, where I made these digital murals that sort of accompany storm drains in the Mission Bay neighborhood in San Francisco. So you'll see where there's storm drain, and then there's sort of a barrier in the middle, and then there's sort of a, right there it looks just sort of like a blob of an animal protecting the storm drain from all the garbage that might accumulate otherwise in it. So I used 6 animals that are all local to the Bay Area or common here. So there were some bat rays protecting the storm drain here. We had seagulls. We had a very sad sea lion. Leopard shark, rockfish, and Dungeness crabs. Thank you.